Hi, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us on this Lean In. I'm Michael Linke from the Australian Institute of Architects, and today we're here with a very special presentation from our national corporate partner, Dulux. Andrea Lucena-Orr from Dulux will today be taking us through the fascinating trends shaping and shading the built environment for 2023. And notably, the Dulux Colour Forecast for 2023 covers 3 emotive palettes which revive our spirits with joy and play. The team at Dulux, of course, loves to research and explore and embrace new colour directions. And so in partnership with Dulux, we're excited to share this colour forecast for 2023 with you, where you'll discover all the inspiration you need to find a colour you love and transform your spaces you're working in into an absolute sanctuary.
So welcome to the Dulux Colour Forecast for 2023. The idea of living simply and authentically has really taken on a whole new appeal. The effects of climate change, waste and overconsumption are realities we no longer can ignore. And of course, given our 24/7 newsfeed, this has caused many of us great concern. As a result, we strive to walk more gently on the earth, whether that's with the understanding of the clothes we wear, the food we eat, or the homewares we buy. Luxury was once a byword for ostentation. However, now is it expressed as sustainable luxury. And this really refers to quality, craftsmanship, and responsible production. So, of course, with the work from anywhere arrangements increasingly the norm, and here's just one example, we have continued that whole COVID lockdown cycle, which is no surprise for architects and designers. So, of course, with that, commercial spaces have become more flexible in their design. And of course, we also have to incorporate digital imperatives in many facets of our lives, whether it's at work or at home. Ideally, these spaces should also reflect our values. We have to think about wellness, responsible and considered design, and of course, connections to nature. This could be in the form of interior plantscapes, recycled and upcycled furniture, earth-drawn colour schemes, and of course, all of the use of natural light and eco-friendly building materials. So we've all reacted differently to the upheavals of the last couple of years. Some crave freedom and irreverence, whilst others prefer order and reassurance. The Dulux Colour Forecast 2023 features 3 moving colour palettes. Actually, for some reason, that's not going. Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to get to the next screen. Okay, I think I might have a technical issue here because it's not going to the next. Oh, hey, here we go. It's now working. Sorry, guys. I'll start that again. The Dulux Colour Forecast 2023 features 3 moving colour palettes that reflect these desires with warm earth-based colours that reinforce a connection with nature, oceanic blues that foster stillness and calm, and eclectic brighter hues to encourage those moments of pure escapism. So welcome to Connect, Balance and Revive. So let's do a deep dive into our first palette of Connect. So the Dulux Connect palette really reflects our desire for a simpler lifestyle grounded in nature. Natural and quietly stable hues such as moss, wasabi, sandstone, a muddied yellow-green, and a rich purple-brown brings warmth and intimacy to interiors and commercial projects. And this really sets a relaxed and welcoming sort of vibe that draws people in. Furniture can be crafted from raw timber, leather, and with gently curved lines that add to this cozy sanctuary-like vibe. Whilst fabrics are natural and highly textural, things like woven linen, cotton, hemp, and fine woolen knits. Vintage and thrifted furniture sits comfortably alongside bespoke contemporary lighting made from recycled materials, whilst handcrafted ceramics in organic shapes speaks to our continued appreciation for the handmade and unique. Rather than being hidden away on the marks of time, we are really celebrating imperfect beauty. And that's things like charred timbers, wall paneling, of course, worn leather sofas, faded tartan rugs, and naturally weathered brass tapware. So highlights from this palette include greens and all of those sort of earthy staples that we continue to see dominant in our lives. So just a couple of things on our actual mood board that you're looking at now is you'll see we have this amazing rust material on the bottom left, and that's by Quinn Van Etten. So that particular piece is called The Present. And The Present is a gift collection of knitted surfaces made from natural materials. The work aims to stimulate a closer bond between humans and nature. And you would not believe what this has been actually knitted. It is actually pine cone scales. So you can imagine the level of difficulty knitting these particular pine cone scales would have been unbelievably difficult. So another thing to point out is obviously the chair by Martin Bass. Smoke chair. This was a vintage piece. Believe it or not, they call this a vintage piece from the early 2000s. So I'm now feeling very, very vintage and antique. And of course, how they get to this is obviously using smoke and flame applied to this original zigzag chair. Back in Milan, many, many years ago, I can remember there was a lot of charred furniture, and certainly Diesel did a collaboration as well at the time. But there were quite a few pieces from Martin Bass, and you can even see the char cloth there and the top left as well. You know, that level of talent to be able to actually char something without burning to ashes, and especially textiles, you know, hats off. So when we come to the colours, you'll see we have these beautiful, really sort of receding earth-based colours. We know we have to incorporate those warmer whites when we're dealing with anything that has a browner base, and you'll notice that a lot of these being earth drawn colours, they do have that brown or tan base. So Whisper White we have incorporated because it is a beautiful warm white. Sandy Day, for any of you who have been around for a few years, you would have noted Sandy Day is quite an old colour. It was in the original specifier atlas. Sandy Day is a beautiful neutral colour. It has a bit of red and a bit of ochre and a bit of black. So it is quite a chameleon. It does recede though in the space. It's a really beautiful, warm, subtle sort of neutral. Apparition, same. It's a great neutral to use, has a slight greenish inference as well. Then we go into those sort of green and golds of wasabi, bongo skin, and of course Beaten Track still has that sort of natural gold undertone as well. Cinnamon sand, beautiful sort of rich, sort of rust if you like, but not quite as brown. Then we go into those more earthy greens of Stilted Stalks and Research. And of course, our beautiful brown, that warm brown in Basset Brown, Namunji. Now, both of our actual end colours there, Namunji and Basset Brown, not so much Hammer Grey, but those particular colours are more in accent. We've also incorporated powders because we know that obviously a lot of projects you work with, you have to use decorative and powder as well. So we have incorporated 4 colours that work in with this palette. And some of these colours were new late last year. So they're really, really great powders colours to work with these beautiful earth tones. So how does it look? So when we're looking at this, we talked about those natural materials. Obviously, we have hemp, we have cotton, we have beautiful wool, all of those things that you would consider, you know, nature's finest in materials. We also have that charred timber, and we've incorporated the colour Namaji to give you that reflection of how a charred timber paneling wool would actually look. So there's some really great examples when we get to our actual finished shots as well. You can see, you know, natural stone is becoming more important once again. And of course, recycled everything, whether it's timber, bricks, concrete, you know, recycling ceramics. There's so much in this space now. It's just wonderful that we're living in the era that we are, because we can utilize so much again and again. So working alongside our resident Dulux colour stylist and forecaster, Bree Leach, we were very fortunate to get 3 beautiful properties to photograph this year. And this particular property was on the Mornington Peninsula. It was a beautiful space and obviously amazing vista. All the green vista in the background is all authentic. And you'll find that what we've tried to do is really stimulate those earth colours in the space that we have, and really, I suppose, make it feel more homely and not as large as well. So this particular colour on the left there on that feature is Stilted Stalks. Once again, it has a lot of yellow in it, so beautiful light reflection. We've got Wasabi just on those beams on the ceiling, and of course Whisper White. Now you would notice that it still looks very white in that space. So Whisper White, even though it's a warm white, it still sits back. But importantly, if we were to have something like Lexicon Half or white on white there, it would look quite blue. So it's important when you're using anything, especially with furnishings with that brown undertone, to incorporate warmer whites and warmer neutrals as well. On the left there, just a different angle looking at the dining table forward, but you'll see Brie has also incorporated some beautiful old pieces with contemporary furnishings as well. And that's definitely a reflection of today and what we're doing. There's a close-up image there with the Dulux Research, a really gorgeous, quite a complex sort of green, has a lot of yellow in it, a lot of ochre, so it's very muted, but really beautiful and rich, warm colour. On the right there, you have that beaten track. Once again, really gorgeous neutral colour to use. It has a lot of yellow in it, so it is really great for those sort of south-facing spaces as well, just to sort of bring that warmth back. Sandy Day, I mentioned before, this is a really lovely warm neutral. It just sits back in the space, looks wonderful with all your tans, your browns, your coffees, all of those sorts of colours. It will just sit in nicely, but you can see how it still has that underlying warmth as well. On the left there, we have Apparition as the main colour, and then we're just brought in that one wall there in the hallway of Basset Brown. The middle image I showed you a little snippet before with Namunji just on timber panelling, but of course they've also got all of those beautiful stone floors, and utilising all of your natural materials in furnishings really does lift that room. And that was sort of like an outdoor pool room, if you like, so it was perfect for all of those natural sort of materials. On the right there, you have Cinnamon Sand, and we've incorporated Sandy Day just on that sliding door there, which looked so beautiful and rich. In the bedroom, this is just a larger scale image of that colour research that I mentioned before. So it's very cocooning. It's a really beautiful sort of layered colour. You'll notice that Brie has incorporated some gorgeous layering on the bed linen as well, but I could see this just as well with, you know, dark charcoals or even rich chocolate brown on the bed linen as well, if you wanted that really moody sort of appeal. So when we're looking at the colours, you know, obviously there's a million ways you can bring in these colours because they all work so beautifully together. And when we show schemes, it's not necessarily all paint. This is bringing in obviously furnishings and accessories as well as the physical paint colour as well. But you'll notice that all of these colours, whether you use them in small volume or large volume, because we're so used to seeing these earth-based colours, it's not as overwhelming. So if you're working with clients that are very conservative, I would imagine that they would feel very comfortable in a palette like this. This brings us to our next palette of balance. So let me give you a little bit of a feel what balance is all about. So not everyone is yearning for adventure after our last few years. And of course, many of us seek comfort through structure and routine. The Dulux Balance palette is a refined and reassuring palette of serene marine blues, gentle greens, weathered pastels, and of course, accents of deep garnet that really evoke the beauty and fluidity of our oceans and shoreline. Interiors are pared back and considered with the focus on immersive colour that runs from walls to ceilings, and exquisite detailing such as the sweeping curve of a bedhead or the sliver brass border around a fireplace. All of these things can help to create living spaces that both feel ordered and classic in their intent. Lavish touch me textures such as velvet and silk. You've got, and that could be in things like upholstery and bed linen, really add to that sense of luxury. And of course, we might have accents of charcoal in lighting and architectural features, really creating that contemporary edge. Patterns in art and decor pieces are intricate and understated and are really inspired by the complex and structured patterns found in nature. And these are things like, you know, might be the shape of a fern or a seashell, you know, seeing all of those beautiful mother of pearl different angles that you might get. So seeing, I suppose, not only things from the ocean from a water perspective, but as well as plant life and sea life as well. There was a lot of discussion at our colour marketing group meeting that we had, and a lot of discussion about all of the products that are now come out of ocean waste. It was a really big, 2 people had written papers on that particular piece. And I was actually quite astounded how many big brands are now really tapering and setting goals for how much of ocean waste that they reuse in their products. There's even one company in the UK that was called Sun for Sunnies or something like that. And that particular company used every part of their sunglasses, including the lens, all from ocean waste. And a lot of ocean waste that they're obviously being able to redefine in other materials is, especially in apparel, is the old discarded sea nets. So sea nets make up a huge proportion of ocean waste. So the key colours from this palette include the blues, of course. We also see all of those sort of shoreline colours. So I mentioned, you know, soft pinks and blues that you might see on the inner part of a shell. It also could be, you know, those gorgeous shoreline colours of natural landscapes as well. So looking at our mood board in front of you now, there's just a couple of examples that I'd like to give you. Certainly you can see on the catwalk there, the Dior garment, beautiful featuring flowing transparency. Transparency is a really big part of this particular trend. And using pleats and folds, it really does create that ethereal sort of effect as well. And we're seeing that coming through in textiles for interiors as well. You know, shell effect, certainly I saw some high-end brand in Sydney recently. They had little shells on the end of their shoelaces for sneakers. So we're starting to see those sorts of accessories, I suppose, embellishments come into fashion, which obviously lead into some interiors as well. Another example here is you'll see those beautiful chairs in the sort of mid-right. Now, this is from the designer Ayala Surfety. And she's really created these beautiful sculptural pieces of furniture. And interesting, she only has these particular chairs in ocean palettes. So that she's really reflecting the ocean. And obviously the patterning really resembles the ripples in the sand. So you'll see there's a lot of really beautiful embellishments and influences from the ocean, but not only water, but also plant life and sea life, as I mentioned before. So when we look at the colours, you'll see here still very natural colours, and that's the other thing. It's very different from the Connect palette, but still very, very organic colours. We've incorporated our neutral white in Casper White Quarter, so that's subtle, slight warmth. Terrace White, which is a really beautiful greige, and a lot of you probably would already be using this for different things, but it's a really lovely, we call it sort of like a chameleon greige because it can work with both cool colours. So if you're working it with sort of mid greys, it will work. But also if you're working with warmer colours, with the browns and tans, it also works because it has that subtle warmth. It's got a little bit of ochre and red in it as well. The colour green alabaster half, this is what we call almost like neutral green. It is a fantastic green. If you're looking for a green, I absolutely encourage you to order your A4s in this colour. We have utilised this colour so much recently. It is a really beautiful colour that recedes in the space. The image that is behind me now, that is actually in green alabaster half. Fantastic colour if you've got a small space that you want to make feel larger. This is a colour that you could use, as is pure blue half as well. Those receding cooler colours, obviously they have a longer wavelength in colour, really great colours to use in smaller spaces. Then we go into these gorgeous pinks in porcelain and Mornington, you know, really subtle. Once again, they have that browner undertone, so they'll work with all those tans as well. Then we go into our more mid-tone colours. There we have nephrite in that sort of mid-tone green, if you like. Beautiful Kimberley Sea, which I don't know on your computers whether it looks teal. It's certainly a teal colour. Sometimes teal in RGB comes up quite blue, but it is definitely a green blue. And then we have Starfish. If you're looking for that perfect sort of denim colour, this is a really, really great colour. It's still in that mid-tone, really, really muted, lots of black in it. So fabulous opacity, but really lovely neutral blue to use actually. Sea Kelp's going into that charcoal sort of colour, but still has that green, that blue undertone. And then we have our accents in deep garnet and domino. And of course, once again, we've incorporated 4 powder colors that work through with this particular palette. So how does it look? You know, as you well imagine, anything to do with the ocean, we're talking coral, we're talking wave sort of structures, we're talking obviously all of your transparency once again, anything that gives you that sort of ethereal sort of look, frosted glass once again. You know, like anything, if you wait long enough, it'll come back again. Of course, frosted glass we're seeing in furniture again, which is lovely. Materials, no surprise, we're seeing transparent materials, lots of recycled textiles as well, you know, utilizing whether it is ocean waste as well, but also just reusing denim and any sort of recycled materials. You'll see the beautiful vase there that almost looks like coral, but it's actually made out of stone. So replicating those beautiful natural materials with other natural materials. But once again, you can see the softness of this palette. So even though there is more those mid-tone colors in the cooler sort of palette, because they recede, they still sort of step back. So once again, working with Bree Leach, we were able to utilize this gorgeous home in Melbourne. And you can see utilizing those 2 blues, how it gives you that sort of beautiful, peaceful sort of feeling, very, very tranquil sort of space. And Bree really tried to incorporate a lot of that sort of ocean sort of feel, if you like, in colors, and even, you know, the ottoman there that almost looks like a sea anemone, and lots of reflection of color as well. On the left there, very classical, we've used domino just in the kitchen there and on that bulkhead, and Casper white quarter, just to really show off that blue in the vases and the everything on the shelves, all those sort of items on the shelves, to sort of highlight those. The middle image there shows you that beautiful sea kelp, that really beautiful deep dark charcoal blue that has that dominant blue inference. And of course, terrace white is in the hallway there. One of the good things is when you're utilizing the same tonal colors, so if you're using blue and blue or green and green, you often, if you use an anchor color, it can be a really small volume. And in this particular case, Bree has orchestrated that in the chair in that sort of deep garnet color. But it's amazing because it's a shortwave color, we automatically go to where the red is in that photo, and then you get to appreciate everything else around it. And just one little thing in this particular room is on top of the fireplace there is actually a beautiful artwork, and it's actually real coral. So Bree had to put her white cotton gloves on. It was very fragile, but just beautiful. On the right there, you've got the colors nephrite, and of course we have the Kimberley Sea just on that bulkhead. Now we have put nephrite on the ceiling and the walls in this space, and you'll notice the big variation between how it is viewed on the ceiling versus how it is viewed on the walls. Nothing new, there's no secret magic here. It's purely light that is doing that. It was a flat roof, no doubt. When we have flat surfaces, we obviously get diffuse light, so you have a much lower level of light versus obviously direct light on the walls, and lots of light reflection as well. So really interesting if you are ever thinking of using a deeper color on ceilings in both, you know, commercial spaces or residential. If you wanted it to be a similar color, you do have to reduce the strength of the ceiling color. The only reason you wouldn't need to do that is if you had angled ceilings, because obviously they would reflect light in a different manner. This particular space is Starfish. I mentioned that beautiful denim blue. It looks great with stone, looks great with all of those sorts of really earthy greens as well. And once again, Bree has used that deep garnet color just in little snippets on the chair and also in the cushion. On the left, just a different angle of that beautiful lounge space with the pure blue half and Kimberley Sea. The middle image there is just Mornington on ceilings and walls. And you can see Bree has brought that sort of beautiful bed head into play to replicate the waves. I mentioned that the green alabaster half, and this is just simply on the balustrade there with the Casper white quarter, but you can see how elegant and how subtle that color is. It really does step back and recede in the space, but it certainly gives you enough that it highlights that beautiful feature as well. This is my background, of course. So we've just utilised the green alabaster half on the ceiling and wall there, and everything else is in the Casper White quarter. But you can see using that tonal sort of, tone on tone, if you like, very monochromatic, what we've done is bring in the pink once again to throw our eyes, so you can get a really good indication of the whole space. So tonal colour is really important to add that little bit of a colour that just throws the eye a little bit on the warm side if you're using cool colours. So when we're using these colours, once again, we see these colours in nature. These are not overwhelming colours, especially because a lot of them are in that cooler sort of space. There's no real reason you can't use these colours in high volume or low volume. So it really is incorporating, if you want to bring, a light space, obviously those beautiful soft neutrals, or the green alabaster half or pure blue half, or if you're wanting to bring in those sort of mid-tone colours, you can do that just as well if you want something that's quite dramatic. So this brings us to our most colourful palette, which is Revive. So this is a bit of a fun one. So of course, standouts on this palette really are quite, what can I say? They're not vivid, but they're bright. So certainly there's things in our Revive palette that sort of reflect on what we did in the Forecast 2022 in our Wonder palette. They're a little deeper than last year's brighter palette, but it draws off the same philosophy. This is the so-called out with the design rules and in with personal expression. Here we have mustardy yellows, breezy blues, rose pink and lavender, and of course this striking emerald that's splashed across everything from walls to furniture to create spaces that instantly make us smile. The standouts from this palette include this emerald green, and I mentioned to you, emerald green is a really big colour in fashion that is definitely coming through textiles and even in tiles as well. So this colour will play a really big and unexpected sort of turnout in 2023, and we will see that continue as well into 2024. We're seeing things like fluted paneling on a kitchen island and paper bag orange, things like saturated hues, but also really speaking to the natural aesthetic. So incorporating these colours with other colours that obviously reflect or downplay the brightness of those sort of colours. Mixing nostalgic elements such as 80s style colour blocking and mid-century style furniture with futuristic features like digital and pixel and patterned art. This is a look best described as retro-futurism. I love that, retro-futurism. And obviously the metaverse has a really big influence on this particular palette as well. And certainly in our colour marketing conference, and also Colour Hive and even Future Lab, the importance of metaverse from a design angle is really important. There's so many products that are being designed for the metaverse, but obviously being able to be recreated now with the likes of 3D printing. So maybe products that, previously we had in our vision and our imagination couldn't be actually physically manufactured, but now with 3D printing, it's just giving us so many more options, which is brilliant. So just in regard to this particular mood board, I've just picked out a couple of things here. You'll see that really gorgeous immersive colour on the cartel installation at Milan. You'll see a lot of their tables there. You can customise those, which is really, really lovely to be able to do that, especially for commercial and retail fit outs. Then we have the Marimekko dress in that gorgeous emerald green that I mentioned was a really key colour. And just the light there on the bottom left by Marjan Van Orbel, it's called Sun, S-U-N-N-E. This is quite amazing. It harvests energy from indoor lighting, and then you can utilise that light again at night. So once again, solar lighting for indoors is something that's becoming more of a thing. With the fact that we've got the lighting exhibition at Milan Design Week this year, I think we're going to see huge innovation in interior lighting, and it's really exciting to see some of the projects that are coming through already. So when we see the colours here, you can imagine much, much brighter than the other two palettes that we've seen, but in unison, still really, really usable colours. So once again, we have used a white, but Lexicon Quarter this time, so going quite a purest white, if you like, because we've got cleaner colours. So when we're using clean colours, you really need to utilise quite a pure white or a crisp white. So we have our yellows in Day Glow and Golden Sand. Paper brown's a really intriguing colour. It's got that gorgeous brown undertone. It's quite muted, but when you see it in situ, it's still got a bit of punch. So it's a great colour just to bring a little bit of brightness and great light reflectance as well. Those mid-tone blues of greens of diorite, and of course blue in Breezy Half. If you want that receding colour, but a bit of brightness behind it, really great colours to use. Perplex, that really subtle, gorgeous mauve, which we saw mauve in last year. We are still seeing that, especially in textiles and also in beautiful tiles and things like that as well. Princess Pink and Pink Chi for those accents, and of course Purple Celebration, Integra and Pharaoh's Gem as our emerald green. Once again, incorporating some beautiful bold powder colours just to sort of incorporate some of those really great accents. So how does it look? We're seeing some really fun and really different designs. Obviously, 3D printing is really pushing design in many sort of angles. Lots of beautiful different shapes, almost like animation, if you like. So something that we'd see in cartoons. Lots of immersive colour. You know, obviously, you've still got that retro undertone, and you can see that in a couple of things here. Almost sort of chubby furniture, so that once again, almost that animation, and really, really beautiful sort of reflection as well. So when we look at this screen from a materials perspective, you're seeing pretty much everything. Lots of recycled material coming through in 3D printing. You know, animation, you can see the Xanthi Summers vase there, but it almost looks like it's been hand drawn. The chairs up the top, they almost look like they're paper mache from something in the metaverse. So you're really seeing a really eclectic mix here as well. And even the Tetri objects in the top left there, they give me a vibe from a shape perspective, but of course a new age, because it is 3D printed. It gives you sort of more a contemporary vibe, you know, on something that may have, from a shape perspective, we may have seen in the 50s or 60s. So once again, we were able to utilise this beautiful home in Brighton, which did have it was quite a modern home, but really had a modernist feel. So here we utilised the Day Glow just on the fireplace, above the fireplace there, Golden Sand just on that small wall to the right, and of course that perplexed on the ceiling with Lexicon Quarter. So lots of colour, but really trying to highlight obviously the beautiful colour in furnishings as well. On the left there, just on the fluted paneling there, we have Perplex, which is just beautiful and soft with that natural stone. And of course, that paper brown that I mentioned before, that still is very muted, but it does have a bit of a punch because of the colour combination as well. Middle image there, simply just using Breezy Half on the ceiling. You know, ceilings were really, really big, painted in the 70s. And once the 80s came, everything went white. And I don't know why, because coloured ceilings are great because you don't get a lot of reflectance of colour on the materials on the ground. Unless you've got angled ceilings, of course, that's when you'll get more inference from the actual reflection. But it's great to get colour in a space without overwhelming a space as well. So this particular feel, obviously, just simply with Lexicon Quarter, gives you that vibe of, you know, beautiful sunny day with that gorgeous blue sky. So a really happy space to be. On the right there, using diorite on the walls, we also use that Pharaoh's Gem just on the ceiling. So you can see using that tonal combination once again, and bringing in those warm colours to bring the focus so you can really appreciate the whole space. Once again, just a different angle. You can see the gorgeous soft blue on the ceiling there. It's really subtle, but you don't get a lot of reflectance on the physical furnishings, which is great. So I always say to people, if you don't want to feel like you're overwhelmed, try the ceiling. If you've got flat ceilings, it's a really great space to have colour. On the left there, you'll see Princess Pink as a feature and Lexicon Quarter, just a different angle of that particular lounge room there. And of course, on the right for something more dramatic, just simply using the purple celebration on that ceiling there with Lexicon Quarter. A little bit of an ethereal sort of feel there with Breezy Half just on the ceiling and Lexicon Quarter. And of course, on the right-hand side, we have the pink chi on the door, Lexicon Quarter as our main colour, but just one tiny wool as you're walking up that hallway, just to give you that sense of colour with Paper Brown and Breezy Half in stripes on the wall there. So looking at the colours in as a total sort of scheme, if you like, you can put lots of these colours into furnishings and accessories and simply use one or two colours, whether you stay in that sort of tonal variety or whether you contrast colours, that works just as well. But certainly you can use a lot of brighter colours singly, and they can still work beautifully in spaces. And sometimes they sort of make everything else sing as well. So obviously A4s are available for all of you. There's no reason why you can't, order a few A4s and just have them in your kit now. When you're looking at particular spaces, it might remind you of something that you've seen today. But I'm going to hand it back over to Michael, and hopefully we've got some great questions. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you very much for that, Andrea. Yeah, a number of questions have come through actually.
Great,
so we'll
excellent.
we'll go from the top down. Look, Adrian wants to know, when we're talking about that Connect range, what would you look to pair in terms of fittings with a Connect range? Would you do white fittings or would you do black fittings? What are your thoughts?
The beauty of that range, you could do either. I just sort of be a bit careful that if you are using those sort of more brown-based colours, so a warmer palette, if you're using white, make sure it's not a really stark cool white. If it does have more ivory, or if it's a natural white, often they are not as on the cooler side anyway in natural materials. But certainly if you're using white, it needs to be at least neutral. And of course, if you're using black, well, black tends to sit back anyway in a space, and it does work with all these muddied colours because there's lots of black, of course, in these muted earth colours anyway.
Perfect, thank you. Look, Catherine's asked us two questions. One of them
Sure.
Could take half an hour to answer or 5 minutes, I'm not sure. How do you go about identifying trends? It's an interesting one. You dropped in,
absolutely,
there's
yes.
a number
I
of
could talk about
different
this for
global
hours,
events.
but
You could, and we have.
Version.
But how do you give us a pre-seed version of how you go about identifying trends?
So put it this way, we have actually already started our 2024 trend search. So as soon as one is bedded, we're already on the next bandwagon, if you like, for the next trend sort of searching. We have access to many different reports around the world. So we look at global reports predominantly based in Western Europe. So we obviously, from an Australian perspective and New Zealand as well, we definitely follow what Western Europe are doing, much more so than North America from a trends perspective. We're very highly influenced by that market. So we utilise reports from companies called Colour Hive, that's one, which they also do the Mix magazine. And we have several seminars with them a year, but also we get a lot of material from them online. We also are in LSN, which is part of Future Laboratories. So that gives us a lot of access to amazing innovation in design in particular. I remember years ago when I first saw a 3D printer that was through Future Laboratory. They found the innovator who actually had, made this particular 3D printer, and we just were blown away by it. And even things like, obviously, some of the fairs. So Milan Design Week is a big one. We had someone on the ground there in July last year, or June, I can't remember when it was now. And of course, we're all going this year again in April to Milan Design Week. And we get reports from all of our different design events globally through Colour Marketing Group. So there's always someone through our Colour Marketing Group, which is an organisation, not-for-profit organisation that has many different facets to it, whether it's from a science side of colour to marketing to designers. And we look at current colours, but we also look where those colours are going, and importantly, from our own market. So even though we get a lot of material from global organisations, we still have to make sure and filter that information for our market, because there's certain colours, because of our light, that won't work in Australia and New Zealand. So, and even from a cultural perspective as well. I hope
Catherine,
that helps.
yeah, that's great. Thank you. And hopefully that answers your question, Catherine. Her final question to you is just about the colour palettes. Where do we get samples of these beautiful new ranges?
So A4 brush outs available to you guys online. So please order away. We have plenty in stock, so there's never a problem. All of these colours come from the atlas. So if you have the current atlas, you'll be able to actually obviously utilise that as well. But even if you don't, we do have the atlas online that you can order directly from there. And the powder colours, you can access those through the Powder Coatings website as well, and you can get their samples of those new colours as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Look, this is an interesting one. This is a question from Adrian, and he says, look, do the colour palettes account for things like luminance contrasts for accessibility requirements? A lot of our architects, of course, are doing work in that sort of aged care and supported care environments. What's your response to that?
Absolutely. So we work in this space a lot. So all of our colours do have the LRV reference. So if you go either online, all of that is under the specification detail on the right of the colour. And obviously in your atlas, or even if you've got a Dulux watercolour fan deck, you'll notice that they're in the contents page at the back. So the atlas has the RGB as well, but both the fan deck and the atlas have the LRV. And we understand that LRV is that 30% difference or variation that we have to utilise to make sure that we've got that contrast, which is our most important thing in public spaces, and especially in hospitals and obviously aged care as well.
Thank you. Caitlin wants to know, what decade is the main influence in this year's colour forecast? I mean, in one of the forecasts, obviously 70s came across pretty strong, and yes, she does say it's a big influence. However, she can see that the tones are very soft and natural in the forecast. Does a decade influence the colour forecast?
Look, I would say historically, yes, but it's amazing how, because with interior forecast, it's quite different to fashion forecast. So fashion forecasts work on a seasonal palette and obviously on an annual scale. We look at interiors on an annual scale, but we get what we call is an evolution. It's not, people don't just throw out everything from year to year and change everything in the interiors. What they will do is they'll make small steps. They might bring in some new cushions, or they might bring in linen if it's an interior. Even for offices, it might be different vases that they put out for different seasons, or maybe they bring in different colour for chairs or things like that, to reflect changes in cycles of trends. But certainly from interior, when it comes to where are the influence coming from, some does come from historical, and certainly we can see that nostalgic sort of piece when we look at that Revive palette. Definitely that retro influence is very, very big. But then you also have to sort of on the top put the metaverse, because the metaverse is also another huge influence as well. From a Connect perspective, which is that beautiful earth-based palette, a lot of that was really big in the 70s. So it's not that we're redefining what everything is. It's, I suppose, how you would use it. So in the 70s, we use muted colour with bright colour. And I'm sure a lot of you, online today can remember brown and bright orange was really big. Now, would we use that today? Probably not. We tend to go more muted, all, encompassed. So I think the way we utilise it, yes, but there's still some underlying influence by the decades for sure.
Great. This sort of stays in the 70s icon box. How do you avoid a palette that dates?
As I said, evolution is how interior fashion works. So it's quite different to fashion. So from one year to the next, you'll find colours, we call them, they have iterations. So they go a little bit left or a little bit right, or maybe a bit darker or a bit lighter. So they don't necessarily fall out of the palette from one year to the next. We've had this earth palette for the last probably 4 years now, but if you look back 4 years, you probably find, it's quite different, because what we're reflecting is what we're seeing in the other markets. Because remember, paint doesn't go into a space on its own. We're looking at many other materials and designs that obviously go into spaces as well. So just like we saw brown coming through, so did Laminex, so did Warwick Fabrics, so did probably every other brand, Caesar Stone, you name it. They saw that 4 years ago when we started to see brown coming through and replacing our grey undertone, which was there for probably a decade. So it's no surprise that we're entering this much warmer decade.
Here's a question from Vlad, and he wants to know about the new colour ranges. They look great. Are they available as powder coating finishes?
Some of them are. With powder coating, it always depends on the volume that you order. So if you're ordering in small volumes, it would be very expensive. Obviously, if you were doing small jobs, if you were doing larger jobs, absolutely. They can just be a custom colour from Dulux.
Okay, thanks. Steve wants to know, if you've got polished concrete floors, Andrea, do you go for lighter or darker ceilings and walls? What do you reckon?
I think you've got, the thing is with concrete floors, obviously it's quite a cool base as well. So you could go for dark ceilings, absolutely, especially if it's a high ceiling. I love coloured ceilings and darker ceilings anyway. But certainly you just got to think about light, because like anything, the darker the colour, the more imperfections will show. So if you've got, depending on the light and the way light's coming through, if you've got a plasterboard ceiling and the joints are not great, which, as we know, it's hard to get those joints right in ceiling, especially with plasterboard joints. Just be careful of that. That's all I will say. So darker ceilings, absolutely, especially if you want something really dramatic. I think often, I remember for the Colour Awards years ago, we had one of our finalists, I think actually one of the winners for our interior residential. It was an apartment in Sydney right on the water, and had the most amazing view. It was just incredible. They had this really white, great, huge space, and they painted the ceilings black. And of course, what that did is it framed the space. Straight away, you just looked exactly where you were meant to look, that multi-million-dollar view. That's what it was all about. So I think sometimes black is really great to define a space and really, I suppose, focus it in on what you really want to be seen in that space.
Great stuff. Thank you. Valentina wants to go for a cocoon effect. And she's asking, what's the best approach for a ceiling colour? The same shade, same palette? What's your advice to achieve peak cocoon
absolutely
vibes?
If you're going darker to get that, either mid-tone to darker colours, and you want that cocooning effects, absolutely do ceilings as well. If you utilise one colour well and really, I suppose, layer your furniture and accessories, or whatever the infill is, layer that in a point where it's still in a monochromatic sort of thing, I think that really helps that cocooning effect. You don't really want a great contrast when you're trying to do that cocooning effect. It all has to be quite moody and sort of on the same sort of scale when you're talking volume of colour.
Great stuff. Thank you. Look, Adrian's just popped a question in there, but he's got colleagues who haven't been able to get to this session. Adrian, and for everybody else who's wondering, we're recording the session. We're going to whack it onto YouTube. So we'll upload that in the next couple of days. So if anybody misses it, we'll just send them the link and you can watch it at any stage of the day or night. Let's get back to the questions. One of the questions is interesting. William has a lot of colonial furniture in his house or his client's house. Would you comment, Andrea, on colour punch, revive, bold colour as a backdrop to feature these colonial furniture items?
Absolutely, you can do that. We talked about colour blocking, and especially if you've got some really prized heirlooms that you want to make something of, using one colour well can really do that and celebrate, what's in front of it and bring focus to that piece as well. It depends on, I suppose, the overarching look that you're looking for. If you want it to be really fun and almost, give you that sort of happy vibe, definitely Revive palette will do that. There's no doubt, with those cleaner colours. But if you want it to sort of sit back more and, I suppose, from a colonial perspective, they would have used those earth-based colours a lot in that period because they didn't have a lot of pigment, let's face it. So it depends on the overarching look. That's all. You can't, I suppose I'd have to see the whole mood board to understand whether it's going to work. But I always reflect back to my own likes, and that is I use a lot of colour at home, and I've got a very contemporary space. I came from a very traditional home, so I've gone from one extreme to another. And I did have to actually sell all my antique furniture, unfortunately, because it did not work in the new space. But in saying that, I'm really embellishing colour now. So I think even though I did before, it was much more muted. Now I'm actually able to use more clean colours because of the architecture as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Look, a lot of our members do a great deal of work in the sort of multi-res apartment space.
Yes.
And Paul's put a really good question in. Give us some advice and guidance on what you're seeing generally in apartment interior sort of colour trends. What's happening at the moment? Is it still a white and grey, or is it changing?
You'll notice on the outside, obviously, it's always reflected on building material. So if they're using, maybe the local bricks, or maybe they're using stone or timber in the outdoors, it would tend to reflect the colours that obviously work well. And they tend to go more conservative in multi-res because obviously it's always about natural colours and I suppose hopefully trying to get that beautiful sort of exterior. But interior, we find that there's a lot more colour in the reception area, or the sort of entry piece, if you like, because often people don't mill there for a long time. So, and often in these new multi-res, there's no concierge or anything. So you're just literally, you've got maybe a little bit of small furniture where people can sit and wait for people. But ultimately, that's your opportunity to really put a lot of colour. And when it comes to actual, changing floors and levels, predominantly we see one colour used throughout in a lot of these spaces. But in some, I suppose, more customised areas where people can maybe utilise some colour in feature, panelling is still really popular in these spaces, I suppose, to add that texture as well. And that often people use colour on that panelling as well.
Okay, great stuff. Look, a really interesting question Finley's asked. Obviously, we get a lot of our colours from Europe. I mean, that's where the majority of the inspiration in terms of the trend analysis comes from.
Yeah.
Can you give us some examples to Finley and all of us for maybe some colours that don't really work in Australia, given, our intense sunlight, given our cultural sensitivities, those sort of things? What's your thoughts on that?
So there's a few colours. Yellows are a really hard colour in our I suppose southern hemisphere lighting. So yellows, especially yellow greens in particular. So I can give you an example of a colour called Ginger Crunch, which is in our atlas. It is a yellow green, really beautiful earthy yellow green. Inside you get that, it's beautiful. You've probably got 400 lux levels, something like that in a standard sort of space. Put it outside on a 10,000 lux level sunny bright day, it will turn fluoro because of metamerism. So metamerism is when light plays havoc with colour, and yellow greens are notorious for that. So there's certain colours, and also the way we use purples is very different to the way Europe uses purples. Deep purples and royal sort of violet colours we tend to use very sparingly, and because we don't utilise a lot of wallpaper, you'll find, because a lot of wallpapers have those colours in patterning and things like that, we don't tend to see as much of those here as well.
Perfect, thank you. This is a more technical question. Does the range provide certification on the C1 and the C2 combustibility ratings? Is that information available online?
I think it is. I've got Cherie next to me, but the best place to actually ring is the 132377, or when you're on the dulux.com.au, you'll see the little chat box that comes on. When you're on the professional website, which is just the professional link on the dulux.com.au, you'll find that will be a technical person online that can help you with all of that sort of information.
Great stuff, thank you. Two more questions and then we're going to call it a day and announce the winners. What are the anticipated lifespans for colour forecasts, and what are the time frames based on?
So we only look at it year on year. So even though we do seasonal colour, we utilise our forecast colours. That's more in the consumer market as well. We only, as I mentioned before, colour forecast is an evolution. It's not something that we change dramatically from one year to next. You might get some colours that come in, but ultimately we'll see the changes over probably 5 years, really like significant changes. You can really see it over a decade in particular, especially because we've changed from that grey decade into a brown undertone decade. So we'll start to see going from cooler sort of bases to warmer bases as well. So it is quite different. We look at it on a yearly scale, but when we're talking about forecast, it is an iteration of last year. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. Thank you. And a final question from Adrian. What colour trends are you seeing in education projects? Again, a lot of our architects are working in that academic space.
Absolutely.
What sort of things are you seeing in schools, unis, tertiary institutions? What's hot?
Sure. Well, obviously in the classroom, we tend to go more muted again. So those soft blues and greens are perfect, or neutral colours in classrooms in particular, whether it's tertiary or even primary schools. When we're talking about areas, and a lot of this is in new education, if you like, whether it's tertiary or school, high school or primary years, you have these areas where students are mulling, if you like, in a more a creative thinking space. So it might be in a library area where you can have a bit of color. It might be in a corner of a hallway that they've sort of put a beautiful, lounge sort of area, or beanbags even I've seen in schools. That's where you can actually have colors that really help from a creative thought perspective. That's where you can bring more clean colors in as well. We've seen a lot of that. And even it's amazing, even in aged care, believe it or not so much bright colors, but certainly more color we see in areas where they tend to sort of come out into social settings. And because it helps trigger mind as well when you have a change of color. And I know I talked about this when we're doing lockdowns, but even in your own home, if you've got a home office and then you've got a lounge room the same color, it's hard to switch off. Whereas if you have a color in your office that tells you this is my working space, then you go into your lounge room, which is a completely different color. It automatically triggers you of a change. It's a different feel in that space. It's the same thing with schools. And I know we recently did a color scheme for a primary school, a beautiful heritage primary school in Ballarat. And they had, obviously on the outside, we were quite restricted to what we could do, but on the interior, we had to obviously think about that 30% variation for exit doors and all that sort of stuff. So we did that. But we also thought about these areas where they wanted to create that creative thinking and that teamwork sort of approach. We did some bold colors. We did beautiful, like this really bold orange. And we did this really gorgeous sort of teal green. And the same thing, we're working with primary schools with our Smiling Mind, which is the mindfulness app for students in schools. And we did a whole palette on, more muted colors in different spaces, so they could actually feel much calmer in that space as well. So there's a lot of things you can do from an emotional connection perspective with color. And I think the more that we utilize color for what it can do, the better any sort of space will end up.
Perfect. Thank you so much. A really fascinating session. A huge thanks to you once again for joining us, third year in a row. Andrea Lucena-Orr, Colour and Communications Manager at Dulux. You've been fantastic. Now, sitting next to you is Cherie. We can't see Cherie. Cherie McAuliffe is our top honcho spec manager at Dulux. She has been actively drawing people out of a hat. And I'm going to say the 5 fan winners are Catherine Bourdet, Caitlin Brown, Paul Mutton, Steve Davis, and Adrian Riverland. You've won each a fan deck, so congratulations to you. And to our Colour Atlas winner, which of course is valued at $250. The winner is the lovely Janet Beeston at Frontier Heritage here in Melbourne. Massive congratulations to you, Janet. We will be in touch with each of you individually afterwards just to make sure that we can send some stuff out to you. That is it for today's Lean In. Thank you so much again, Andrea, for joining us to go through the 2023 Colour Atlas and all of its forecasts. I think it's just been fantastic, and a lot of really intelligent and interesting questions have come through to our audience. So on behalf of us all here at the Institute and our membership, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure, and great to see all of you online. Look forward to seeing you again at another Lean In very soon. But that's it for today. I've been Michael Linke here at the Institute of Architects. Great to spend some time with you, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks.